We can enjoy listening to 3 sounds of the bell together and let our bird fly and our cloud be free as we enjoy the sound of the earth expressing itself through the metal that is the bell. Coming back to our breathing, finding it gently, coming back to our body, softening our body. So good morning, dear beloved Sangha. Today is the 30th of April. It's the Saturday. We're in the middle of our retreat, the delicious middle of our retreat. And I'm recording what I'm going to say here, and I feel I have a lot I would like to share. So please forgive me if it comes... I will try not to speak too fast, but please forgive me if there's a lot, and I promise to make the recording available. So if you feel that you missed something, you can listen back. I also love to stand up when I'm speaking, but I'm going to try and sit down for as long as possible before I stand up. Yesterday we had a wonderful Dharma talk from Brother Phap-Lin, where he really took us deeply through how we can learn and train ourselves to be with uncomfortable feelings, in particular in our body, which is where most of our feelings find an expression. And this is very important in our practice, to not run away from or be afraid of painful feelings, and to know also how to balance them with more positive feelings of well-being, of ease, of compassion and kindness. So Thai always used to say there are these 2 parts of our practice: being able to embrace our suffering and handle it, and being able to generate happiness and well-being for ourselves and for those around us. And we do this not just because it makes us feel better, it's not really an end in itself, but it's because when we are well, when we can feel well in ourselves and can handle our suffering, our mind is clearer and we can wake up to what is going on inside us and around us. So awakening and insight is always the aspiration of our practice. It's not just a comfort practice to feel better, and once we feel better we can continue our life as normal. In fact, we want to feel well so that we can wake up more deeply. There's something in our practice also that is cultivating a kind of resilience. I don't know if you have this word in Dutch. Veerkracht. Veerkracht, okay. A strength and a resilience. Sometimes we can't bear to see the truth because we know we're not strong enough to handle it. So the more strong we become in terms of being well and handling our challenges, the more courage we have to see the truth more clearly. And Brother Fablin and I continued Dharma discussion after his talk and after our afternoon sharing groups. And something that was very important in Brother Fablin's message yesterday is that if we know how to use the energy of mindfulness to feel well and happy in the present moment and handle our suffering in the present moment, we don't need to consume so much. And this is a very important point because living simply is something that many of us might have an aspiration to do, but we struggle. We struggle to live more simply because we feel we need all these things, all these experiences, all of this input. And yet we know that it is our way of consuming as a species that is doing a lot of damage to the planet. And when we can learn to use our spiritual practice to satisfy our deepest needs in our heart, we don't need to consume so much. And that is already an essential key to the solution for our planet. Not only do we consume less, so we're doing less harm, but we have more time to be able to focus on the things that are most important to us to do, and more clarity, because we're not filling ourselves with hundreds of hours, whether it's, I won't make a list, but filling our sensory input with things that may not be in line with our deepest aspiration to be of service and help for the planet and for all beings. We may not have so long on this earth, and every hour is precious. How do we spend our time and energy? What are we feeding? How are we taking care of how we use our time, our energy, and our resources? So when we have a kind of self-sufficiency, when you can rely on yourself to be able to handle a painful feeling without losing ourselves in consuming, when we can find happiness by being with the trees and the birds and the ocean, then there's a kind of self-sufficiency, and we become a source that can be of service to the world. There was another interesting point that came up in the Dharma talk yesterday, which is how important it is to turn towards our suffering with kindness, tenderness, and compassion, and to not push it away. In 2013, when Thai was in America, he described our practice of how we generate compassion in our tradition. We went to Stanford University, where they do a lot of research into the science of compassion and how there can be more compassion in healthcare settings. And we had a dialogue between the head of this research department and Thai. And they were asking, well, how do you generate compassion? And Thai described what he called the mechanics. The mechanics of compassion is that mindfulness of suffering gives rise to compassion. It's by being in contact with the suffering that we touch the seed of empathy, of understanding, and compassion in us. And first it begins with ourselves, and being kind in our own heart, kind to our own pains. And we have many practices that help us do that, practicing with our inner child. And the wonderful image we had yesterday of a mother holding a baby. So our compassion begins within. And when we have compassion within, it's something that we can offer to others as well. And this is important because many of us who are engaged and who care a lot about the situation of the world, we can become overexposed to suffering. A question I often have is, how much news is enough? We need to know what is going on, but then we have to practice our mechanics of compassion to transform our exposure to that suffering into an energy of compassion in our heart, and to make sure that we're not overwhelmed. If there's an imbalance there, there's so much exposure to suffering and we can feel overwhelmed by it, and we may not have the time, unless we take the time after having watched a news clip or read a news article, to make time to transform that suffering into compassion. And I became very aware of this at one point in my monastic life. So I was only reading the news once a week, and I only read the headlines on the BBC website. The headlines was enough. I thought, I don't need to know more of the story, I can quite visualize it. And that was enough for my walking meditation with the community. I could hold those headlines and I had a sense of what was going on in the world, and I could generate compassion. It's almost as though we need a homeopathic dose, homeopathy, the micro-medicine. We need a homeopathic dose often of the news, and that's more than enough for us to work with. And this is important also it relates to consuming. If we over-consume negativity, unintentionally, without meaning to, we may limit our capacity to do something about it. We may limit our capacity to be calm and compassionate and have a real response. Because when we feel too overwhelmed, we become numb and we become paralyzed. So this is an interesting question for our practice. How much negativity are we taking in? And is it spurring us, triggering us to more compassion and more right action? Or is it too much and overwhelming and burdening us? When we talk about the climate crisis, we talk about individual responses and collective responses. And in our tradition, we see there's a deep interbeing between the individual and the collective. But we're also fascinated by collective change. And I enjoy reading about theorists of change. And there's one social science theorist, and he says that there are 3 ways that humanity needs to prepare ourselves to respond to the current crisis. The first we hear a lot about. It's called mitigation. This means we really have to stop the actions that are damaging the planet. So this is the pollution, the destruction of ecosystems, and so on. Mitigation. Next, we realize that there is something unfolding that will continue to unfold in terms of our ecological crisis. So we need to adapt. So adaptation is the next thing. We need to not do the bad things, and we need to be able to adapt. So this is, in terms of infrastructure, ways of living, ways of making electricity, ways of consuming. And the third thing, he said, as important as these other two, is cultivating human resilience. In the climate sphere, this sphere of activism that some of us dip into from time to time, the human element is often the most neglected. We think we just need the technology, and we forget that humans need to collaborate and work together, and it will always be humans operating the technology. And this social scientist who came up with these three theories, Bob Doppelt, who emphasized the importance of human resilience. He said what we as a species most need to do is to develop ways of coping with change, ways of generating and creating environments of wellness for ourselves and our planet, and ways of kind of collaborating and communicating together. And this is very important when we think about the future, what we want to be able to transmit to future generations. The skills of human resilience, the insights of human resilience. Maybe we can't anticipate what the planet will look like in 200 or 500 years' time, but we really hope those humans will be able to breathe calmly, be able to listen to each other, be able to handle their pains and maybe even traumas and grief. So human resilience is something we also need to build and cultivate as a society, as a human species, just as important as the mitigation and the adaptation. Tai used to often say that if we want to take care of the environment, we also have to take care of the environmentalist. We are part of the environment we want to take care of. And sometimes in our efforts to do well in the world, especially those of us from Protestant countries, we may put our own needs aside. We put our own needs aside in order to be of service to something greater. And for activists, this can be quite a danger for us. I include myself in this. It can be quite a danger if we sacrifice too much of ourselves for the greater good. There's a kind of dualism in that we think that the thing to be solved is outside us and that we are separate from it. We want to be compassionate for the planet, and in doing so, we're not compassionate to ourselves, and we forget that we're part of this planet. We may want to be kind and compassionate to others, and yet we are unable to be compassionate to ourselves. And when we think about this mechanics of compassion, it is very hard to offer what we don't have. So if we would like to offer compassion, we want to be able to generate it within our own heart. So maybe we can enjoy a sound of the bell and check in with the quality of compassion you have for yourself in this moment. Even one sound of the bell can be a kind gift to our heart and to our body. We can offer ourselves an inner smile. In this moment, I am enough. I am just as I need to be. So here on the retreat, we're learning to take care of our body and our feelings. And one of the most wonderful things about Buddhism is we also learn to take care of our mind. And our mind is our way of seeing ourselves and the world around us, our way of thinking. And the kind of way that we show up in the world, our way of being, our way of acting, depends also on our mind and our way of seeing things. And we know that when we don't feel well in our mind, we're not able to take the kind of actions or make the kind of decisions that are helpful for ourselves or helpful for others or for the world. So our state of mind is very important as a foundation for right action. I will continue standing up. So I'll do a little recap from yesterday. Brother Fablin was sharing with us about mindfulness, concentration, and insight. Those of you who may remember Thai writing this on the board, sometimes his 3 circles were very big, very beautiful, and they intersected because there's a natural flow from mindfulness to concentration and to insight. And insight here is sometimes also called right view. Okay. And we like to call it the insight of interbeing. The insight of interbeing. So whenever somebody says, "Oh, you practice mindfulness," you can say, "Well, I also practice concentration, and I also want to cultivate the insight of interbeing." That's what we're doing. Just being mindful is not enough. We want to go deeper to see things more clearly. And for some of you who may have seen the book, Zen and the Art of Saving the Planet, the whole opening section is about the insight of interbeing. And we call it a radical insight. Radical because it has the power to change our way of seeing ourselves and our way of seeing the world. And I'd like to share a little bit more about this radical insight this morning, and to share a little bit how I have practiced with it. It's easy to think that Buddhist ideas, sometimes people call it Buddhist philosophy, they're very nice ideas, but it can be hard to see what it has to do with our suffering. So today I will try to give some examples of how the insight of interbeing can really address at the root some of the suffering in our mind about the climate crisis. And when we can transcend that suffering, it opens up a path for right action. So I'm going to start a new page. We have to plan our board action, because this is a little bit smaller than the board in Plum Village. Okay. We will revisit that page again. Okay. I've written the words Diamond Sutra, and we're going to look at 4 notions in the Diamond Sutra that we want to bring into our daily life. If you want to learn more about this sutra, you can read the book. It's a very important sutra for many, many, many reasons. Some of my favorite ones are, it is the oldest printed text in the world, the oldest printed text in the world, made of wood blocks in Chinese, and you can find it in London. I'm sorry for my ancestors. In the British Museum, which is a practice in collective retribution. And we went to visit the text actually with Tai to enjoy it when it was on display. So it's an ancient human wisdom. And in our tradition, it's particularly important because one of our ancestors made a very early translation of it. And so our spiritual lineage in Vietnam. So the Diamond Sutra is trying to help us humans, even 1,500 years ago. It's a later sutra, so not exactly from the time of the Buddha, from Buddhism a little bit afterwards, as everyone began to apply the insights of the Buddha's teachings, to try to help us understand our world and not get caught in the kind of wrong ideas that make us suffer. The first idea, you all will have heard of, I imagine, is the idea that we have a separate self. So, we're going to say no separate self. For some of you, you may not have heard teachings on this. For others, you may have heard 100 teachings. I will say how I find this helpful. For me, I like to understand the teachings on no separate self in terms of space and in terms of time. In terms of time, I find it very helpful to see that I am a continuation of my parents and grandparents and culture. Living in a multicultural community, you suddenly realize what it means to be English because nobody else is. And you realize, oh, this is my Englishness. So I get more of a sense of what that is. And it's not exactly me or mine, but it's something that I have learned and grown up with. And the fact that I am a nun today is not also really me or mine, because my grandfather was fascinated by meditation and by many different spiritual traditions. And he would cycle to the train in the 1980s to get on the train to London, to go to a few bookstores, to try and find whatever books he could on meditation. And I think of all the effort he went to try and look outside of Christianity to wider traditions. And it's just incredible that in my lifetime, I can continue his seeking. Because I think we can, somebody asked me yesterday, oh, so why did you become a nun? I thought, this is not a conversation I can have in 5 minutes. But I think for many of us, if we're on this retreat, it's because our parents and grandparents and maybe many generations of ancestors have been looking for something. And there's a very interesting contemplation on time, which is, it is our turn to be on this retreat together. 100 years ago, our ancestors didn't have a chance. The conditions were not ripe for them. So when we sit here, we enjoy the ripening of mindfulness, of Buddhist practice in Europe, and this is just incredible. And without everything that they were looking for, we couldn't be here now. So when you go home and someone says, so why did you go on this retreat? It wasn't only me on this retreat. It was several generations of ancestors that took me there. When I was young, I also grew up in the east of England, which is also a very flat part of the country. So I feel right at home here. Brother Fablin keeps asking where the hills are. And I'm like, no, but look at the sky. And I think for those of us that live in flat countries, we learn to enjoy the sky. And when I was young, driving to and fro from school and across the flat countryside, my mum would always say, look at the sky, darlings. Look at those beautiful clouds. And she trained us to look at the sky. And the eyes with which I look at the sky are also the eyes that my mum gave me, right? So when I'm far away from my mum and I look at the sky, we can ask, who is looking at the sky? It's my mum who taught me to look at the sky. These are her eyes, and in some ways her consciousness that is enjoying the sky. And so it's like my mum and I are enjoying the sky together. And maybe, I've never asked, but maybe it was my grandma that also taught my mum to enjoy the sky. And recently, last year, I was on a home visit, and my nephew was like, Granny, look at the sky. So there's interbeing across time. We are all looking at the sky together. I will draw a little axis to help. So interbeing across time and interbeing across space, and that is how we can enjoy a sense of no separate self. I think on this retreat, we have a lot of opportunities to enjoy interbeing across space, meaning we inter-are with the air, with the water that we're drinking, or tea or coffee, with the food that we're eating. We have a deep sense of the collective energy that we are generating together, a collective energy of mindfulness and concentration. It's a fact that if you were not here, we could not be here. There's a real coming together. One way in which the idea of no separate self has really helped me is like some of us, as well as the wonderful things I inherited from my parents, I also inherited a sense of sorrow or melancholy. and even I would say despair. So when we talk about seeds in our consciousness, pretty soon after practicing, I started to realize, my seed of despair is definitely very present. And then after a while I realized, oh, it's bigger than most people's. And what was very important for me is to realize that it's not my burden alone. I know there are many people in my wider family or in previous generations that suffered from depression. And there was one point in the monastery when I thought, oh, this is quite a burden. I have to carry this burden. But when I realized that the despair is not mine, it's mine to play with, it's mine to respond to, it's mine to take care of, but it doesn't exactly belong to me. I have a role to maybe be with it in a new way in this lifetime, but it doesn't have to become my burden. And this was really liberating for me because I had identified myself with my despair. And I think it goes for many of the seeds in our consciousness. Non-self can give us a healthy distance from our inheritance. Oh yeah, okay. Hello, my little despair. Hello, my parents and grandparents. I will do my best, but I am much more than this despair. I am also my happiness. I am also my peace. I am also my playfulness. And I will take care of you as best I can, but I'm not defined by you. We can also speak about collective despair and anxiety. And one way in which the teaching on no separate self is very important for the climate is to realize that even our despair about the climate is something to work with, something to practice with, to take care of. It's not something to limit our action. And we can take care of it together. And as our social theorist was explaining about the need for more human resilience and collaboration, the teachings on no separate self help us to work together as a collective and as a community. And Tai always taught us that the greatest kind of impact we can have is as a wider body, as a collective. So in Plum Village, you kind of group together lots of practitioners and we all agree to shave our heads and wear robes and to work in harmony, which is quite a challenge. And I think if we were a different kind of community, you know, a community of priests, where we all just went one by one to different villages, it would be a completely different energy that we would be generating, because we would be individual practitioners rather than a community that is learning to work together. And one of the things we learn to do is to, as we work together, to let go of our ideas. I mentioned this when we were talking about working in teams on this retreat. That is a very concrete practice of no self in our daily life. For the harmony of the collective, I am ready to let go of my idea. I need to identify myself with my idea. Sometimes we grip onto it. This is what is most important to me. This is my red line. This is my value. This is my principle. I am right. and in this practice, we say, do we want to be right or do we want to be happy? In community practice, there's something about letting go, a generosity. I will let go so that we can go forward together. There's a phrase I really like, which is, "It's amazing what you can get done when you don't mind who takes the credit." I don't know how to translate that into Dutch. It's amazing what you can do when you don't need a name or a person to take the credit or the praise for that action. For me, I once had this experience, which is sometimes when we take action, we want it to have our imprint. And there was a sense I had once of, I didn't want it to go quite how it was going in the Sangha. And then I had the thought, oh, maybe this isn't the right path for me. And I thought, yeah, maybe I'm the problem. So I need to leave the Sangha and not be a nun anymore and let the Sangha get on with whatever the Sangha's doing, because I have different ideas. And the reason I laugh is because I was like, yes, that's a very good idea. You know, let the Sangha get on with it and I'll step out. And I think like some of us from our generation, we have a relationship with Thai, with our teacher. And the problem about having a relationship with your teacher is somehow he's in your consciousness. So there's a sort of voice there whenever you do something that's a little bit off track. You suddenly hear his voice. So in this particular moment, I heard Thai's voice or his energy. And it was like, the message was, this is not about you. It's not about you. You need to get out of the way so that action can take place. And I'm not able really to describe it, but there was a sense that it's not me being a nun. I don't know how to say it. It's not me being here. All I just need to do is get myself out of the way so that nunning can happen and right action can happen. Something like that. Okay. You're getting a lot of my practice here. So okay, this is how I do this. The next idea is that there's no such thing as a human being. So no such thing as a separate self and no such thing as a human being. And this is addressing two particular problems that we get caught in, especially in the climate crisis or our response to our current situation. There's two kind of complexes that we can fall into. One is thinking that humans are very special, and the other is thinking that humans are the problem. Okay? So the humans are sort of superior or humans are inferior in the problem. When we think that humans are kind of special, we think the earth is there for us to use and exploit. We think that it is up to us to come up purely with technological solutions. You know, sometimes we hear that in the climate movement. Don't worry, science is so advanced, technology is so advanced, they'll work out the carbon capture. Don't worry, future generations will solve this problem. And we have an overconfidence in our human capacities. More deeply, I think, especially in the maybe the Christian West, there's this idea, even there in the Bible, that the earth has been given to us by a God for us to use. Animals are there as a gift for us to eat. And this is quite deep in our consciousness, and in Buddhism there's an invitation to look again at this kind of dualism. After the Paris Climate Agreement in 2015, I was part of a working group of interfaith representatives, And we were wanting to come up with some different climate statements. And it was quite hard to mention the importance of eating less meat, because that was very difficult for the Christians, who were overrepresented on this panel. There were 7 Christian representatives, because each church got its own representative. And I kept saying, well, why are we only one Buddhist? We could be more. But it was like that. So I fought quite hard on the vegetarian point and diet as something as spiritual practitioners we can focus on. But the real sticking point was that the opening statement of this text said, we recognize that the earth is a gift. We recognize that the earth is a gift. And at first they had God-given gift. So I said, well, actually that doesn't include all faiths, because we have an issue with that. But the word gift, and then I really struggled with it, because there's this sense that there's a separation between us and the gift, and that somehow we're entitled to it. It's somehow a possession. But they weren't used to Dharma discussion, so it was quite hard to have the meetings about this text. I can't remember in the end if they removed the word gift or not, but I didn't. I withdrew from the group after that, because I felt it wasn't so beneficial to spend our time. But it's an important point to be aware of whenever we're thinking about how we use land, how we give space to other species. Is it really for us, at our disposal? We have this phrase in English. Is it for us to use? To whom does the land really belong? How can we give wild species the space that they need? There's been incredible research recently about how many of the species that are occupying the earth are domesticated animals and how many are wild animals. And we think that the planet belongs to us and our domesticated animals, but it also belongs to the wild animals. They also have their rights. Okay, so the first complex of being human is that we think we're something special. And the second is we think that we're to blame. And sometimes, especially for those of us who are a bit younger, we may have a real hatred and resentment for our fellow humans. And I think this is very natural. It comes with a real sense of kind of guilt. And I even heard it come up in the pandemic. Like, let the pandemic take its course, because this is nature trying to get its own back at the humans. And I even heard that from long-term practitioners. But that is also, this idea of wanting to blame humans can also be an obstacle, because humans, we are also part of the earth. And that hatred and that wish to punish is not part of the solution. Compassion and insight is part of the solution. If we also think that as humans we are to blame and we are kind of worthless, sometimes that can translate in the kind of climate context to, I feel powerless to help. Who am I? I'm just one person. Who am I to help? I'm part of the problem. With that view, we're limiting ourselves. We think we're only a human. We think we're only one person. But in fact, we're much more than human. We are part of this miracle. We're part of the earth. And if we let the earth get on with acting through us, we can be part of the solution. So this can be very, very helpful for some of our mental responses to the climate crisis. Maybe we can have a sound of the bell. Breathing in, I know I am more than human. Breathing out, I smile to the more than human life in me and around me. Earlier this month in the UK, they passed a law recognizing that animals are sentient beings. And our brother Spirit and I, our first question was, which animals? And it includes octopuses. So for those of us who have watched My Octopus Teacher, and this is very important to be able to establish better welfare practices on farms and so on. And what's important about it is it's really based on the science, and there's some incredible scientific research about how some of the things we identify as being most human we share with many, many animal species. And there's a wonderful researcher whose work I love a lot. Unfortunately, he passed away recently, but he has given many wonderful interviews. His name is Jaak Panskep. Did I get it right? Jaak Panskep. And he was a researcher on emotions, and he discovered, he became a researcher on emotions because he discovered that the rats in his laboratory performed differently in experiments depending on whether you picked them up lovingly or if you picked them up by the tail. So that was how he started developing his research, and then he spent the last decades of his career learning about the incredible sentience of living beings. So he is an example of a wonderful, compassionate being who learned to treat all the animals that he worked with great respect. So you can enjoy listening to him. And he discovered 7 basic emotional states that we share with all mammal species. So when we say there's no such thing as a human being, don't be so sure that we're so special. And don't be so sure also, because sometimes we get very caught in this idea that, and it comes from our Christian roots, that only we have a soul. That only we have a soul. And I think this is a very important contribution of Buddhism, because it looks like that's a very generous teaching, but in fact we're taking something away from other species by saying that, because we're suggesting that they don't have that depth or those qualities or those feelings that humans do. And in Buddhism we don't discriminate in that way between human beings and other species. Okay, which brings us to the next idea. To not be so sure that there's such a thing as a living being and inert matter. This helps us with our earth awakening because it addresses the problem that we tend to discriminate between things that we can harm and things that we can't. We're very sure that the atmosphere is not alive. We're very sure that water isn't, or maybe the earth. And so we do things without seeing that all of these elements are part of a living organism, which is the earth. I'm going to put another scientist on the board. It's Lewis Thomas. Which is a scientist that Thai love very much. And he spoke about how the whole planet Earth is like a living cell. Of all the things in nature that Earth most represents, it's not an organism, it's not a species, it is like a cell, and the atmosphere is like the skin of this, the wall of the cell, and how it functions in its self-regulating ways, just like a living cell. So his book is called Lives of a Cell, meaning of the planet. It's a very beautiful book. So sometimes, like all of us, I have strong feelings from time to time, and I think my inner child, sometimes you don't know what to do with your strong feeling, and you want to kick something. And so there's this idea that you don't want to kick a tree, but you'll kick a lamppost. Do you see what I mean? We think there are some things that are living and other things that are man-made that don't deserve the kind of respect or care. And this is a mind of discrimination to really pay attention to. One time I had to print a document, actually for Thai, about the Paris Climate Agreement. So it was in about 2013, 2014. And he had asked me to give it to him before the Dharma talk. And the printer wouldn't work. And, at first you just Control P, try again. And, I got a bit frustrated. So I hit the printer. Because sometimes you think it's just a little bit jammed. You've already turned it on and off. And then I had this moment of awakening, because I'm like, okay, this is a document for the earth. I'm trying to give it to a very peaceful Zen master. And here am I, hitting this printer. And so I had this moment of awakening. And then I was suddenly like, this poor printer. And then I realized that this printer was plastic, which means it was oil, which means that it used to be a rainforest. And I suddenly was like, this rainforest doesn't want to be a printer. So then I'm like, hugging this printer, I'm so sorry I hit you. I know you don't want to be a printer. I know a printer is such an ugly thing for you to have become. I'm so sorry. But this is a really special document for a really special person. And maybe we can just print it together. And I kid you not, honestly, the printer did then work. But this is not a scientific experiment, and I haven't tried to repeat all of these conditions. And but I think I learned something about also not discriminating, and interesting how it both changes our action and also the mind that is acting. Yeah. And another way that this teaching is very important is if we think that some parts of the world are less alive than others, we lose a chance to be nourished by those things. And the more we see that the world around us is alive, the more we can be nourished by it. So yesterday when we practiced walking meditation and we experimented with seeing if we could feel that we were walking on a living earth and not on inert matter, we were changing our state of mind from how we've been taught at school. We were changing our habits of mind to open up to a new possibility about the nature of reality, and that it's as though we open ourselves to extra nourishment. So this is very important, because if we see things as inert or dead, we lose a chance to be nourished by the life that is there beneath our feet. It is possible to walk through a city and to walk on the tarmac, asphalt, in a way that we don't feel like we're walking through a dead city. We're walking through life that has been transformed, and maybe that asphalt also doesn't want to be asphalt, but maybe it's on its way to another transformation in a few thousand years. Our language is one of the things that is making us put the world into boxes that don't fit. And some of you may have read recently in the climate movement, a lot of people are talking about a particular Native American language called Potawatomi that has more verbs than nouns. So I think in English we're about 30% verbs. But in this Native American language, 70% verbs. So for example, instead of saying, that is a bay, I don't know the Dutch word for bay, the ocean, you know, the gentle part, baai. Instead of saying that is a baai, you say, there is baying. Baying is happening. And it is a relationship between the shore, the water, the rocks, and the birds. So maybe here in Holland, we would say, instead of there is a polder, you'd say there is poldering. And humans are part of it, and the land is a part of it, the birds are a part of it, the wind is a part of it. There is a whole co-relation happening. And this helps us break down these barriers between what is alive, what is man-made, and we just see that everything is interbeing, is in a very living interrelationship. Okay, the fourth notion. There's no such thing as a lifespan. A lifespan in Dutch.
Levensduur.
Levensduur. Okay, levensduur. This morning we had quite a challenging meditation where we looked in the mirror of our reality and had a chance to contemplate the fact that we do age, the fact that we are of the nature to get sick, we are of the nature one day to pass away. We're of the nature to be separated from all that we love. And then the final step of the meditation is very interesting. It says, my only continuation, my only legacy, heritage, is my actions of body, speech, and mind. So when we speak about no lifespan, what we mean is that our actions, our energy, our imprint on the world continues long after we pass away, and in fact is already continuing us in this moment. We are already radiating out our actions of body, speech, and mind. And we have been for as many years as we have been alive. And those actions are what continue us in the world. So in Buddhism we speak not so much of soul, but of energy. Energy that we are putting out. I just want to clarify one point here, which is at the end of Brother Fablin's talk yesterday, he did mention that we're speaking about things in two dimensions. The first is the historical, or the relative. You are you and I am me, and you are alive and we are not yet passed away. This is all in the realm of what we call relative or historical truth. And in Buddhism, we're always wanting to go deeper, to touch the deeper, more ultimate truth, the true nature of what it is to be alive, what it is to be human or more than human. So this is that Z that we saw yesterday. Tai came up with this Z, we call it the Zorro. You can see a whole series of talks from 2013 to 2014 on YouTube of Tai experimenting with different ways to draw the Zorro. And he even got a monk to make him a 3-dimensional Zorro, because he wanted to be able to bring down the 2 dimensions together, because we touch the ultimate through the historical. And the slide, the Z here, is the insight of interbeing, helps us touch the ultimate. Sometimes we can use the idea of the fact that we do have a lifespan, and sometimes we can use that to help us make good use of our time. So we are skillful in how we use the idea that we may not have many years left, or how do we want to spend this one precious life we have. We can use that idea to inspire right action. But if we get caught in that idea and we think we're only this lifespan, then you need to use the other idea, which is, no, you don't have a lifespan. We go far beyond this life, and both truths are operating at the same time. It is both true and not true that you have a lifespan, depending on which way you're looking from or how deeply you're looking. And this is very important in our climate action, because we need to be able to see beyond our own lifespan. We need to be able to make peace with the situation we find ourselves in now, which is the fruit of many hundreds of years of action, and maybe many thousands of years of human mind, craving and building and striving. So what we are living now is already the fruit of previous generations. And there is no such thing as only solving it in our lifetime. Being able to live in harmony with our planet and with other species is going to be something for many, many generations to continue to practice and find solutions to. So this is a very important point, because sometimes the seed of despair comes up when we think it's too late, or we may think it can't be solved in my lifetime. Sometimes there's a kind of hedonism that comes up when we think it's too late, I'm going to enjoy my life anyway. Because we then think that the future that happens after we die is nothing to do with us. But actually, because of interbeing, we in our new manifestations, our continuation bodies, whether that's our physical descendants or our cultural and society descendants, our continuation will be living that future. And it's our turn now to represent what action can happen now, so that they can benefit from the fruits of that later, just as now we benefit from some right actions before that are ripening in our lifetime. So it's very important to see how the idea of a lifetime can sometimes limit our action. And it also calls us to a lot more generosity. As we heard this morning, we will be separated from those we love. We will be separated from our possessions. It's not that our possessions are somehow ours. They are with us for a short time. And this can really help us address questions of how do we want to use our time, our energy, our material resources. Maybe the best legacy we can give to future generations is not, a house, 4 walls, bricks and mortar. Maybe that's not the best legacy we can give, because anyway, that will be, in 1,000 years, where will that house be? But if we can transmit compassion, tolerance, resilience, strength, ability to handle suffering, ability to generate happiness, that can endure for hundreds of generations if we can transmit it well to the next generation. Sometimes Thai used to joke that Plum Village is not a place, as if any of you have been there. It's a very humble place, and the buildings are not much to speak of. And Thai said, my transmission to you is not a big temple. My transmission to you are these practices. The temple is not important. Fancy meditation halls or comfortable dormitories is not important. What's important is the practice. And when we think about how we want to support our children, our grandchildren, or future generations, we have to think in these terms. How our actions of body, speech, and mind can be an energy that can inspire and be a good legacy, not in terms of possessions. Maybe we can enjoy a sound of the bell. So in Buddhism, when we speak about the kind of action that continues us, we always speak about triple action. Our thinking, our speech, and our physical action. So I just want to show you that what we're building here is the Eightfold Noble Path. So, can you see? If we ask, how is Buddhism responding to the situation in the world? How is my action relating to what is going on? The Eightfold Path are 8 elements that are continually in operation and driving our engaged practice, driving our way of being in the world along the lines of the 5 mindfulness trainings and our ethical aspirations. Yesterday, Brother Fablin spoke about right mindfulness as being different from wrong mindfulness. So there's a kind of ethical dimension to how our practice is expressing itself in our daily life, in our relationships, and in the world. So we can call it right mindfulness, right concentration, concentrating on wholesome things and not toxic things, right mindfulness, right concentration, and right insight. That was what we learned about yesterday. Sometimes right insight is called the insight of interbeing, or right view, has many different names up here. And that is the foundation of our thinking about ourselves, about humans, about the planet. I've spoken a little bit already about maybe handling feelings of despair or helplessness or overwhelm by using the insights of the Diamond Sutra to change our way of seeing the world. Using those insights to kind of flip our perceptions. A mantra we have to always practice right thinking is, it's often a very good idea to ask ourselves, am I sure? Sometimes we are over sure, we're too sure. Tai even wrote a calligraphy, are you sure? Question mark. And maybe some of us, we need to put that in our homes. Sometimes we're very sure that we are always right, or often right. Am I sure? Is there anything I can let go of that would make me happier in this situation, or the other person happier? Am I so sure that everything is as bad as I think? Can I practice appropriate attention to change my perspective on this situation and see what is going well? Tai used to joke that maybe 90% of our perceptions are wrong. So 90% of the time, asking ourselves, am I sure, is very, very helpful. Another thing I have learned with right thinking is to not take my mind so seriously. Just because our brain generates a thought or an idea, it doesn't mean it's a good one or the right one. It is just an organ operating and delivering things depending on what inputs have come in. It is generating a thought. And in Buddhism we say, we try not to identify with our thinking. We don't think this thought is me, this thought is mine. Maybe this thought belongs to your partner, your colleagues, the newspaper, the website, or your parents or grandparents. We don't need to be caught in thinking that a thought is ours. We have a lot more freedom around our thinking. The kind of thoughts we have depend a lot on how we're living our day, what inputs we're taking in, the conversations we're having, what we're reading, what we're watching. And one time when we were at Google in America, in California with Tai, and they're really interested in innovation and great new insights, and they were asking him, you know, how do you prepare yourself to have more insights? And Tai was really amazing. He said, well, actually, most of our thinking is useless, and all of Tai's great insights have come from the deeper level of consciousness, from what we call store consciousness. They haven't come from cogitation and problem solving. And we know that in a lot of the research they've done into depression and despair, overthinking, over-cogitation is what is feeding the depression. And when we can relax our thinking mind and allow the garden of our consciousness to be nourished, good seeds to be watered, by being in nature, by listening to positive things, whether it's music or Dharma talks, by being in an environment that's healthy, our store consciousness becomes like a healthy garden, and insight naturally arises. A bit like yesterday when Brother Fablin said, whatever your first idea is to solve a problem, put it to the side. The next idea, put it to the side, and allow insight to ripen. And this is really important because I think in climate action and in taking care of our Earth and our society, our thinking gets in the way. Our overthinking, our problem solving burdens us and is an obstacle to right, simple, clean, compassionate action. We come to right speech. Yesterday we had a chance to look into the 5 mindfulness trainings, and there are many beautiful practices to explore, as we're doing also in Dharma sharing, how to listen deeply and how to take responsibility for our speech and how to train ourselves to offer the kind of speech that is really the kind of speech we would like to continue us in the world. Being able to practice courageous, compassionate listening and calm, honest speech is very important for our capacity to be able to come together to protect the planet. And in the COP21 in the 2015 climate negotiations that were led by one of Thai's students, so Christiana Figueres, who was the chairman of this that particular COP. She's a student of Thai's and a very deep practitioner, and you can find a lot of fascinating, I write about her in the book, and you can find a lot of fascinating interviews with her online, where she says that one of the most important skills that she brought to the Paris Climate Agreement is exactly the practice of deep listening as taught by Thai. That in those negotiations, it was the capacity to listen to different sides, and then her as a facilitator to be able to bring different sides together, to not be in a mind of judgment and criticism, but to meet all of the different actors in the negotiations as human beings with their concerns, and to be able to listen with compassion to them. She said it was what really transformed the negotiations and enabled the breakthrough. So never underestimate the training in deep listening that we can do in a retreat, in our Dharma sharing groups, that we can practice in our families with our loved ones, that we can practice at work with our colleagues. This is a climate resource. This is what humans, we need to learn again how to really be present, how to really hear what someone is saying and what they're leaving left unsaid, how to be present for them and their deepest concern. It's a real art, and it's an essential art, and our children need to learn it, our grandchildren need to learn it, how to keep communication open and how to restore communication when it falls apart. And right now in the climate movement, since the last COP in Glasgow, there is a lot of division and discord, because the two sides, or no, maybe there's more than two sides, there's a lot of polarization between those who want to work with the oil companies and the radical activists that say there's not enough time, compromise is not good enough, only radical solutions can work. And it's like the whole temperature of the discussion has gone right up, and you may have seen videos circulating of the climate activists disrupting presentations by people who are either working or collaborating with oil companies or trying to find more gradual solutions. So there's a real discord right now between the idealists and the pragmatists. And when Christiana Figueres came to be with us after Thai passed away, she got on a plane and brought herself to Plum Village, and she offered to join our team. So whatever you may have watched to do with Thai ceremonies, Christiana was behind the computer helping with a lot of that. And after she spent a month with us, and at the end of her stay, we asked her, how can we support you in your work? Like, we want to be of service to you as your spiritual community. And she thought about it for a few days and then came back to us and said, we would like your help to hold a compassionate space for dialogue between these different parties in the climate movement who cannot even sit in a room together. So we have the challenge in June of we will have about 20 or 25 different leaders in the climate movement coming to Plum Village. Our accommodation is not good enough. And we will practice together for 3 days with no shop talk, no business talk. And then we will try to hold some spaces for deep, compassionate listening and dialogue. So this is a very, very important practice. We shouldn't underestimate these fruits of our mindfulness training that we are all cultivating together. This is one of the things that the world is most thirsty for. To be able to sit with someone whose views and values we think we disagree with, and find a shared ground where we're not afraid of the other side, we don't feel threatened by them, and we can really hear what their concern is and why they have arrived at the view they have. And so right speech, which goes together with deep listening, is an essential medicine for the kind of polarization that's happening at all levels of society. So if you ask, what can I do to help? If you can learn how to listen, you are already the earth acting to help the earth. You are already human, and none more than human, acting to help our species. So triple action, we have thinking, speech, and action. And Thai would always describe this particular action is any actions that we take to care, to protect, to support, like bodily action. We can also say that the way we consume is action. What we reach for in the supermarket, what we don't reach for. Also how we spend our time, our energy, our material resources. And also how we choose to spend our life energy, the kind of livelihood we choose to have. And that is so right action naturally leads to right livelihood. Sometimes Thai said, what's the use of seeing, what's the use of insight if it doesn't lead to a change in how we live our life, the kind of decisions we make, the choices about how we spend our time and so on. And Actually, again, it was also at Google. There was a dialogue between Tai and many hundred employees. And at Google, someone asked Tai, they said, I can see that it was a male employee. He said, I can see that my father and I are, but I just can't take the step to open up dialogue. I can see it, but how do you have the courage to take that action? And Tai said, in the seeing there is already the seed of action. You think you have seen, but you haven't seen deep enough yet. Because when you see deep enough, the obstacles to action fall away, and right away you will be able to call your father and say, I'm sorry, how are you? I love you, Dad. The seeing has to be deep enough and radical enough to have that right thinking, which will immediately lead to the right speech and the right action. And if we're struggling with action, a bit like Brother Feblin said yesterday, if we're struggling to take the right kind of action, either individually or collectively, it's because the awakening isn't strong enough. We have to keep looking more and more deeply. One interesting question that came up for us is, how do we measure the success of a retreat? Is it that you all go home feeling happier? 120 happy people, is that enough? And the monastics, we were talking about this, and we thought, no, that's not enough. It's a challenge, but it's not enough. For us, the success of a retreat is the happiness, but it's also much more than the happiness. It's the healing that comes with a few days like this together. And with that healing naturally comes a transformation. We feel differently in our body, we feel differently in our mind. And we get some insights about how we're living our life and what would be most important for us to do. So for us, it's also the actions that are born from a retreat. It's the conversations you can have with each other on the retreat, the phone calls you can make to your loved ones, or when you go home, the conversations you'll be able to have with them, or the ways that your way of being and living in the world will transform as a result of what you realize, the insights that we all get when we practice together. We may have a kind of ongoing question. Yes, yes, sister, yes, yes, brother. But are our actions strong enough as a community? Are we doing enough? We may ask, are our actions the right action? Is a retreat action? Do we know? Do we know how much we can do? We may ask ourselves, can I do more? Can I do more? Should I be doing more? Can we do more? Should we do more? And these questions may be turning a lot inside, and they're very good questions. I think Tai would be very happy that we ask these questions. They're also questions we can ask as a collective, for collective insight. In Plum Village, when we have very difficult questions, we call a Dharma teacher meeting. And 70 people have to sit together, and sometimes you need another meeting and then another one. And Sister Chanduk, she always says to trust in the collective insight. what we can do is also in measure of our capacity, our well-being, our balance, but what we can do together is always so much greater than what we can do as an individual. We shouldn't think that the action is not something we do alone. We are a sangha-ing, if we use that verb form. We are a sangha-ing. And as a sangha, there are many, many fruits of our collective action in terms of our healing, our transformation, and what we can realize together. And maybe there is more that we can realize together when we talk about our dreams and our aspirations as a community. I was always very touched when, especially when young people would ask Thai, like, what should I do with my life? You know, what would be the most impactful path I could take? I mean, sometimes Thai would say, have a long stay in Plum Village. I got that answer, but I enjoyed it when other people got a different answer, which was, Thai would often point to a tree outside, which is an echo of an old koan in Zen. But he would invite them to look at the tree outside, and he would say, look at that tree. Maybe you can see some leaves, I don't know. You can visualize your favorite tree in the gardens here. We think we need to do a lot, but just to be ourselves, being everything we can be, is already enough. And if any of these trees were doing anything other than just being themselves, each species in its own way, being its best kind of version of itself, that is already a huge contribution. And Thai would say, if any one of these trees was less than a tree, we'd all be in trouble. We'd all be in trouble. So the trick, the challenge is to find, what kind of tree am I? We can be solid, we can be stable, our life can be very simple, but our actions of body, speech and mind is like the blossoms, the leaves and the fruit of the tree. And we just live them and be them with all our generosity, all our clarity, all our kindness, our courage, and that is already enough. And we know, as some of us who might have read more about trees, we know that a forest is so much more than an individual tree. And as a sangha, we are a forest, foresting. And each one of us has something to offer our collective forest, and we can be a refuge for so many beings, so many species. So I think our task is, first of all, to be our own kind of tree, and then really to learn how to be a forest together, how to allow our roots to help each other, how to offer each other stability and nourishment and healing in times of difficulty and in times of flourishing, so that we can be a refuge and so that we can offer the fruits of our practice to the world. It is time for walking meditation, a beautiful practice. We can feel at one with the trees as we walk. We can feel part of this beautiful, beautiful planet. And we can enjoy Sangha-ing together. Thank you for listening. Thank you so much.